They say the earth forgets nothing. In the blistering silence of Death Valley, where no footprints last and no shadow stays loyal, stones move across the desert floor on their own, carving paths into time, memory, and something far older than history itself. No wind, no tracks, just stone, gliding through dust like it remembers where to go. When a geologist vanishes without a trace, and a woman returns chasing her father's lost obsession, the desert begins to speak, in riddles, in whispers, in voices buried deep beneath the sand. What follows is not just a mystery of nature, but of guilt, love, sacrifice, and a truth so ancient it can only be heard when the world stands still. This is not a tale of what was. It's a tale of what never stopped. Welcome to the story of the stones that remember, and the woman who dared to ask why they moved. Because once you begin listening to the desert, it never stops listening back. They say the desert keeps its secrets, not by hiding them, but by whispering them so softly, so patiently, that only the loneliest souls ever hear them. In the southern reaches of Death Valley, where the earth cracks like broken glass and time dissolves into heat, there lived such a soul. His name was Raymond Ashford, a park ranger assigned to the desolate racetrack Playa in the summer of 1972. Raymond wasn't a young man, nor was he old. He had that weary look of someone who had watched too many things slip away. War had stolen his brother. The city had taken his marriage. And somewhere along the road, he had let go of dreams he couldn't even name anymore. So, when the offer came for a long-term assignment in Death Valley, he took it without a second thought. He wanted quiet. He wanted space. He wanted to be forgotten. But Death Valley does not forget those who wander into its breathless silence. It watches. It waits. Raymond arrived in late May, setting up his outpost in a small wooden ranger cabin near the edge of the racetrack, a barren, sun-scorched expanse of flat clay ringed by jagged mountains and etched with long, empty trails. He knew the stories. Everyone did. Tales of sailing stones, rocks that moved on their own, creeping across the ground, carving trails as if some invisible hand pushed them in the night. Most dismissed it as folklore or rare winds combined with freezing rain. But there was one thing none of the theories explained: how the largest stones, some weighing over 300 pounds, could leave trails across the desert floor without a single footprint, paw print, or even drag mark around them. Raymond didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He believed in facts, in erosion, in weather and time. But what he saw on his third week changed everything. It began after a sleepless night. The wind hadn't blown once, and the desert lay still as a corpse. But when he walked out at dawn, he saw something impossible. A massive boulder, one he had seen countless times before, always rooted in place, now sat at least 20 feet from its original spot. Behind it, a long groove stretched across the playa floor, curving like a serpent. No storm, no flood, no seismic tremor, just movement. Silent, deliberate movement. He stood there for nearly an hour, staring, sweat pooling down his spine despite the morning chill. Something deep inside him, something ancient, buried, stirred. Not fear, not yet, but a sense of being watched. Raymond returned to the cabin and grabbed his camera, an old Nikon he trusted like a friend. He took dozens of photos from every angle, documenting the stone, its trail, and the complete lack of disturbances around it. Satisfied, he rewound the film and locked it away, planning to develop it during his monthly trip into town. That night, the whisper came. It was not a voice, not exactly. More like a pressure beneath hearing, like the way you feel thunder before it cracks, or the shiver of standing near a sleeping animal too large to see. He lay in his cot, wrapped in a blanket despite the desert heat, and heard it, a dry murmur shifting through the floorboards, brushing against his thoughts. It spoke no words, but it asked a question, not with language, but with weight. It asked, "Do you want to know?" Raymond sat up, heart pounding. He told himself it was the wind or the groan of old wood. But when he stepped outside, the air was dead. The stars overhead were blinding, too clear, like holes torn in the sky. And at the edge of the playa, he saw the stone, the same one, now further along. Another 20 feet. A new trail behind it. The ground around it was completely undisturbed. In the morning, he hiked out to investigate. He measured the trail, photographed it again. But when he opened his camera and removed the film, something was wrong. The film had warped, not from heat or water, but as if something had burned it from within. It was black, glossy, melted. Every image was gone. That's when Raymond began to write. He opened a leather-bound ranger's log, an official journal issued by the Park Service, and began chronicling everything. Not just what he saw, but what he felt. The whispering returned each night, just before sleep. He started having dreams, ancient ruins swallowed by sand, a vast circle of stones turning in the dark, and a voice that spoke from beneath the ground, begging to be remembered. The trails multiplied. Stones moved on their own. Each night, a few feet, then a few more. Some moved in unison, converging in slow arcs. Others carved sharp angles, intersecting like symbols. Raymond began mapping them, connecting the lines, comparing them to star charts and ancient petroglyphs. He stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He started hearing the whispers even in daylight. The nearest ranger post, 40 miles away, received no distress call. Raymond didn't radio for help. He made no entries in the official park logs. Only the leather journal, now nearly full, bore witness to the unraveling of his mind, or the truth of something far older than any science could explain. On the 21st night, something changed. He didn't wake up to the whispers. He was already standing outside in the cold. He didn't remember leaving the cabin. The wind was gone. The stars had dimmed. The stones were no longer scattered. They had arranged themselves in a circle around him. And then the earth spoke. It was not a sound. It was memory. It surged up through the soles of his feet, into his spine, into his skull, and showed him things no man should see. A city buried beneath the valley, circular and alive, its streets formed of rock that pulsed and moved. A people who had spoken to the land and listened in return. A ritual that bound their memory to the stones when their son began to die. And an agreement. Those who wandered the land would carry their history forward or vanish into it. Raymond collapsed. He awoke before dawn, back in his cabin, the journal still open beside him, the ink smeared, the last entry illegible. He couldn't remember what he had written. His camera was gone. The map he had drawn, connecting the trails, was torn in half. He felt empty, like something had been taken from him. He tried to leave that day, packed what he could, tried to start the truck. It wouldn't turn, not even a sound. The battery was new. The tank was full. Still nothing. So he waited. One more night, he told himself. One more and someone would come. But no one ever did. When rangers arrived 3 weeks later for a scheduled check-in, they found the cabin locked from the inside. No sign of struggle. No sign of Raymond Ashford. The bed was made. Supplies untouched. The only thing missing was Raymond himself. His name joined the quiet list of those claimed by the desert. A name few remembered and fewer spoke. Decades passed. Then, in 2019, during a rare desert rainstorm, a team of researchers hiking the racetrack discovered a strange object embedded in the earth. A massive stone, shaped like a half-circle, weighing close to 400 pounds. It bore an unnatural smoothness, as if polished by centuries, except for one crack along the side. Inside that crack, they found something wedged tight. Weather-worn, dried by decades of heat. A leather-bound ranger's journal. The pages were mostly blank, eaten away by time and sand. But the last remaining page was still legible. Its ink had not faded. The stones are not moving. They are remembering. So will we. That was all. No signature. No date. Only a single black fingerprint below the words, embedded in the paper, as if burned into the page from beneath. And somewhere, far out on the playa, a single stone moved a few inches that night, without wind, without sound, and without leaving a trace. The desert remembers. It doesn't scream. It doesn't cry. It watches. Death Valley is a place of silence so complete, it erases time. To the untrained eye, it's an ocean of nothing. But those who know the land, Those who have walked its breathless plains and slept under its indifferent stars understand something unspoken. This place watches back. Dr. Lena Kessler had stopped dreaming about the desert years ago. Her father's disappearance had silenced that part of her heart. But the ache never left. Like the wind through the canyon, it just changed direction. 20 years earlier, Lena had stood hand in hand with her father, Dr. Henry Kessler, on this very ground. She was only 8. Her father was a geologist, respected, eccentric, and obsessed with the unexplainable. His colleagues laughed when he said the stones were trying to tell us something, that they moved with memory, that they wrote in silence. Then one day he vanished. No footprints, no note, no body, just a pair of dusty boots outside his research trailer and a compass that no longer pointed north. Now Lena was back, not as a child, but as a scientist in her own right. She drove into Racetrack Playa in a battered 4x4 with nothing but her father's old notebook, the rusted compass, and the same burning question that had hollowed out her childhood. What was he trying to find? The sun beat down like a punishment as she stepped onto the cracked floor of the playa. It looked the same, vast, blistered, godless. But something pulsed beneath it now. A hum, so faint it vibrated not in the air, but in her bones. She walked in silence, her boots crunching across the playa. The stones were still here, scattered like pieces of an ancient board game abandoned by the gods. Some had moved even recently. Long trails curled behind them like whispers etched in sand. But the ground around the trails was untouched. No signs of rolling, no wind erosion, no animal disturbance. Just the eerie signature of movement without cause. Lena crouched beside one of the larger rocks, a dark, jagged piece of dolomite the size of a dog. Its trail stretched back in a perfect arc, as if it had decided, quite deliberately, to veer east. She reached out to touch it. The sand around the stone resisted her fingers. Not in a physical way, not like stone or ice, but like the desert itself rejected her. The grains flexed, stiffened, pushed back with an invisible force that was almost aware. She blinked and pulled her hand away. Then, something moved behind her. Lena turned sharply. Nothing. Just the open plain, the windless stillness, and the low hum of her own blood. She had been alone for hours. But the feeling had shifted. She wasn't being watched. She was being remembered. Back at her camp, she opened her father's journal. It was full of sketches, star maps, rock formations, odd angular patterns that didn't correspond to any geological theory. One particular page was marked with red ink. The ink had bled into the page like it had been done in haste or fear. They're not random. They're writing something. Each path a syllable. The playa is a language. Below that, a line scratched so hard the paper tore. North is broken. Trust only the west. She remembered the compass, still tucked into the leather pouch. She pulled it out and held it steady. It spun wildly, then stopped. Not north. Not anywhere magnetic. It pointed straight toward the western edge of the playa, toward the mountains no road reached. She stood up, heart in her throat. That's where her father's trail had ended all those years ago. Lena set out before dawn. The cold bit into her skin despite the desert's reputation for heat. As she walked west, the stones became more frequent and stranger. They weren't scattered anymore. They formed shapes, lines, intersections. She stopped to trace a pattern, a spiral coiled tightly like a galaxy. She pulled out a satellite photo from her bag and overlaid it. The trails matched the stars of the Andromeda constellation, precisely. Her fingers trembled. She took another step, and the wind shifted. It was not wind. It was breath. The exhale of something massive and ancient beneath her feet. The playa darkened, even though the sun was still rising. Her own shadow rippled unnaturally across the ground. She turned in slow circles, scanning the stones, the air, the empty reach of the desert. And then she heard it. Not a sound. A pressure. A presence. Something calling from beneath. She fell to her knees and pressed her ear to the desert floor. For a moment, there was only silence. But then, distant, muffled, shaking with familiarity, came a voice. A man's voice. Lena. She jerked upright. The air was suddenly thick, her breath shallow. That voice. She would never forget it. It was etched into every dream she'd had since he disappeared. Her father was beneath the sand. She scrambled to her knees, digging at the hard-packed earth with her bare hands. The desert refused her. The ground flexed against her fingers, rejecting the effort. Her nails broke. Her skin tore. Blood darkened the pale soil. "Dad!" she screamed. Silence. Then the whisper returned, barely audible. "Find me." She collapsed, breathing in sobs. The sky above shimmered, the heat trembling like a mirage, only it wasn't heat. It was memory. The whole valley felt like a living memory, spinning slowly around her. She looked around. The stones had shifted. Not a lot, but enough to be undeniable. Each one pointed toward the same direction, west. She stood slowly, wiping the blood from her hands, her knees shaking. Her father's voice had come from the desert's core, and now she had heard it too. That whisper was not imagination. It was not madness. It was a message. She returned to camp in the failing light, her heart pounding, her brain aching from the weight of what she had felt. She wanted to believe it was just wind, just stress, just grief finally cracking her open. But then she opened her father's compass again. It no longer spun. It pointed firmly, and it glowed faintly red, pulsing, like it remembered his hand. That night, as the desert turned cold and the stars leaned closer than they ever had, Lena lay awake in her tent, staring into the dark. She didn't sleep. And when the whisper came again, not a voice, but the sound of someone breathing through the floor of the world, she didn't flinch. It said her name, Lena, and then another sentence, clear and strong. "They buried me where the stones begin to speak." She wept quietly, curled beneath her father's old ranger jacket, staring at the flap of her tent that moved ever so slightly in the windless night. The desert had spoken. It had remembered her, and now it wanted her to remember it back. The road west from Racetrack Playa was not marked on any map. It wasn't really a road at all, just a faint trail, long buried beneath dust and years, remembered only by the compass in Lena Kessler's hand. A compass that no longer acknowledged magnetic poles. A compass that pulsed when she walked the right direction, as if guided by memory, not metal. She had packed lightly. Just water, her father's journal, a solar radio, and a small pickaxe. The desert was unforgiving, but so was the need gnawing at her ribs, the need to find whatever it was her father had followed into oblivion. The trail led through a narrow canyon, its walls flaked with ancient scorch marks, as if lightning had once danced between them. The silence here was different, not the empty kind, but the dense, waiting kind. It wrapped around her like wet cloth, thick and still. Her breath echoed in her own ears. And then the canyon opened. Before her lay a forgotten town, sun-bleached and half-swallowed by the sand. Racetrack Wells. She hadn't heard the name since she was a child. Her father had whispered it once, sitting by her bedside after a long day in the desert. He called it a place that vanished backward, a settlement swallowed not by time, but by something older. Racetrack Wells looked like it had died with a secret clenched in its teeth. Wooden frames of homes stood crooked and brittle. A rusted windmill groaned in the heat. A single church sat at the far end, its steeple cracked, cross twisted sideways. There were no signs of struggle. No graves. No bones. Just abandonment. Total and deliberate. Lena approached slowly, her boots crunching on gravel and regret. The town's story wasn't recorded in history books. It hadn't made it to ghost town tourist maps. Yet it had existed once. She remembered a mention in one of her father's field journals. Locals say the stones used to gather near Racetrack Wells. Then the land swallowed it whole. She entered the general store first. Inside, sunbeams fell through collapsed beams, dust dancing like spirits in slow motion. Old cans lined the shelves, labels faded, contents long turned to dust. A torn flyer sat beneath broken glass on the counter. Town meeting. The map of the moving earth. Below the title, in shaky handwriting. Bring what you've seen. They're drawing again. We must decide what to do. She stared at the paper, breath-catching. It was dated June 8, 1911. She took the flyer and pressed it into her journal. The air shifted. Outside, the windmill creaked once, a sound like something clearing its throat. She left the store and walked toward the church. Its front door was open. Inside, the pews were warped, twisted like they'd been exposed to immense heat and then frozen mid-collapse. Symbols had been carved into the backs of every seat, circles, stars, intersecting arcs. Not Christian symbols. Older. Stranger. Lena stepped carefully down the aisle. Behind the pulpit, a narrow stairwell led downward into darkness. She hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the flashlight in her pack. Then she descended. The air grew colder with each step. Dust clung to her lungs. It smelled of rust and roots and something like burnt stone. The basement was small, low-ceilinged, carved not from cement or brick, but from rock, ancient, volcanic, and unnaturally smooth. The walls were covered in carvings, not etched, burnt. She moved closer. Dozens of symbols, layered over one another like overlapping thoughts, spread across every inch of the chamber. She ran her fingers across the grooves. They were too precise for hand tools, too delicate for any machine from 1911. And at the center wall was a map. It was unlike any she had ever seen. Not geographic, at least not in any conventional sense. A swirling grid of star-like points, connected by trails. The longer she stared, the more it shifted, the stars seeming to move subtly, aligning with some internal rhythm. It wasn't a map of land. It was a map of movement. Underneath the map was a plaque. She wiped off the dirt. In jagged, almost hesitant lettering. The earth does not remember in mountains or rivers. It remembers in motion. And below that, faint and barely legible, they are still drawing, still speaking. A chill ran through her spine. She took out her father's notes. The spiral symbols matched. The coordinates aligned. But something else caught her eye, a tiny cluster of symbols to the side of the map, arranged in a triangle. She had seen them before. Sumerian. She'd studied them during her postgrad research into Mesopotamian ruins. These particular markings were used in ancient star charts to denote constellations that shifted without consent of the gods. An ancient way of recording rogue stars, or objects that moved without reason. Lena stumbled back, heart racing. The stones weren't just mimicking symbols. They were recreating star paths known only to civilizations dead for thousands of years. But the air trembled. Behind her, the stairs creaked. She spun. Nothing. Just the sound of silence growing deeper, heavier. She backed out of the room slowly, up the stairs, and into the fading daylight. Outside, the windmill had stopped. The entire town seemed frozen. Then she saw him. At the far end of the main street, beyond the row of half-fallen houses, stood a man. He wore a long, dust-covered coat. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face. He didn't move, didn't speak. Lena called out. Her voice echoed against dead wood and stone. The man didn't respond. She took a step forward. The man turned, slowly, just enough to face her, not fully. She couldn't see his face, only the outline. And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. Vanished. She ran forward, heart pounding. But when she reached the spot, the only thing there was a faint depression in the dust, the imprint of boots, and a trail of footprints that led 10 paces north, then stopped, just ended, as if the man had stepped out of the world. She knelt, brushing the sand. The prints weren't faded. They were fresh, heavy. She followed the trail back to where he had stood. At her feet was something glinting in the dirt. A coin, stamped with the seal of a forgotten territory, one that hadn't existed since the late 1800s. On its surface, someone had scratched a phrase. He walks where the stones sleep. She stared at it for a long time. The sky began to darken. The air felt strange again, like pressure building underground. The sand no longer crunched under her boots. It sighed. Softly, she returned to camp and lit a fire. All night, she sat staring into the flames. The map burned into her mind. The carvings, the Sumerian stars, the stranger, the vanishing footprints, and the feeling, heavy and aching, that she had only just stepped onto a much older road, one that her father had walked, one that had taken him somewhere beyond the reach of time. She opened his journal. The last page was smeared, torn, but 3 words were still visible. They are remembering. In the distance, the stones shifted, not by wind, not by gravity, but by intention. The past does not vanish in Death Valley. It waits, shallowly buried, humming under layers of silence and sand, biding its time like a buried drum, quiet until the right footsteps return. Lena Kessler didn't believe in ghosts, but as she sat alone in her tent that night, the map of the moving earth etched in her memory and the coin from the vanishing stranger burning cold in her pocket, she could no longer believe that the land beneath her was just soil and stone. There was something conscious in it. The next morning, she awoke to static on her solar radio. A voice, faint and crackling, came through for a moment. Not a broadcast. A reading. August 3rd, 1857. We crossed the 7th ridge by sunrise. The mules are slowing. Mary is coughing again. The stones moved last night. Samuel said he heard singing. Then silence. Lena sat frozen, clutching the device. She rewound the log. Nothing. No trace of the voice. Just white noise. She stepped outside. The sun was climbing the canyon walls, but the air remained cold. She flipped open her father's journal, scanning pages until her fingers stopped on a passage he had underlined twice. There are stories of a wagon caravan lost to the desert. No bones were found. Just deep grooves and stones standing upright like witnesses. Below, scribbled hastily, camp likely near Dry Hollow, possibly where racetrack merges with the burned basin. Lena marked the coordinates and set out before noon, heading northeast. It took her nearly 5 hours on foot to reach the region marked Dry Hollow, a low basin, wind-blasted and ringed with blackened rock formations. The kind of place even vultures avoided. There were no signs of life. No wooden wheels. No rusted tools. No graves. But the grooves were there. Deep, wide lines carved into the hardened clay, spread across the basin like a fan of trails. They didn't overlap. Each groove moved with intent, curling toward the center, as if the caravan had gathered or knelt. She followed them slowly. Then she saw the stones. They were larger than the ones she'd seen at the playa. Taller, rougher. Their surfaces jagged, not like weathered rocks, but like they had erupted from beneath the ground, broken open, not rolled in. And they were facing something. A single, immense structure at the heart of the basin. A stone unlike any other. It was a black monolith, half buried, its top surface exposed like a tombstone rising out of the sand. Its face was smooth, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The air around it felt thick, like walking into a room that had been sealed for centuries. Lena dropped to her knees in front of it. The stones surrounding it were aligned perfectly. Their grooves terminated at the monolith's edges. It wasn't natural. It was architectural. She brushed dust from its surface. Symbols. Ancient, worn, but unmistakable. Some resembled the Sumerian star charts she had found in racetrack wells. Others were unfamiliar. Spirals within spirals, patterns that pulsed just beneath the stone, like veins beneath skin. She pulled out her father's compass. It didn't spin this time. It pointed directly at the monolith and began to tremble in her hand. Then she noticed the sand. It was vibrating, not visibly, but in feeling, the way the earth shakes seconds before a quake, or how your skin prickles in a thunderstorm before lightning strikes. Lena touched the monolith. The world split open. She didn't fall. She collapsed inward, as if her body had become hollow. A sound, high and low all at once, flooded her ears. Her vision blurred, colors melting and distorting like oil on water. Then came the scream. It tore from her throat unbidden. A sound she had never made before, in a language she did not know. A language that didn't belong to this time. The scream echoed across the basin, bouncing between stone walls and ancient pathways, awakening the dust that had slept for 100 years. Her knees hit the ground. Her hands trembled violently. Her mouth was still moving, syllables tumbling from her like water through a broken dam, a forgotten tongue flowing up through her, using her voice like a borrowed flute. The monolith pulsed once, a subtle vibration that reached through her bones and cracked open something older. She saw visions. Not memories. Not hers. A caravan of families, weather-beaten and weary, rolling through this basin in search of water. Horses gasping. Children coughing. Then stillness. They made camp. And that night, the stones began to sing. Not music. Not song. But tones, deep, unearthly vibrations that resonated through wood, bone, and thought. The travelers emerged from their wagons, drawn by the sound. One by one, they stood around the monolith. One by one, they touched it. And one by one, they collapsed, screaming in languages not their own. Lena saw their faces, eyes rolled back, mouths open, not in terror, but in awe, in recognition. Then the sand swallowed them, not in waves, not with speed, but slowly, like a mother pulling her children into bed. The next moment, Lena was back on her hands and knees, gasping. Her head throbbed, her lips burned, her mouth still moved, whispering fragments of the language she couldn't name. She crawled back from the monolith and collapsed against one of the aligned stones. She lay there for an hour, maybe more, staring at the sky that no longer looked quite right. The stars had shifted again. Or perhaps she had. Eventually, she found the strength to sit up. She opened her pack and pulled out her father's journal, flipping to the last pages. One note stood out. There's a language older than breath. The stones know it. The desert remembers it. And when it speaks through you, you do not translate, you recall. The page below it was blank. She added a new entry. I found the caravan, or what remains of them. There were no bones, no tools, just trails, all pointed to a monolith buried in the basin. I touched it. I spoke words I've never learned. My father may have spoken them too. And if he did, maybe he never left the valley at all. Maybe he became a part of what it remembers, or what it is becoming. She closed the journal and looked around. The wind had returned, softly. But the stones didn't move. They waited. The monolith gleamed faintly under the stars, absorbing light again. As if fed, Lena rose and walked the trail back to camp. Behind her, one of the stones turned, just slightly, as if watching her leave. Lena Kessler awoke to a world that didn't match the one she remembered. The first thing she noticed was the wind, soft and strangely sweet, like it carried a scent of crushed stars. The second was the sky, wrong in a way she couldn't explain. It was too vast, too quiet. The horizon felt farther away than it should have been, as though the desert had stretched in her absence. And the third was the mark on her wrist. It wasn't there before. Faint, glowing softly just beneath the skin. A spiral of 7 dots, each tiny point arranged like a constellation. The ink didn't sit on the surface. It shimmered inside her like memory turned physical. Lena sat up slowly, sand clinging to her clothes, throat dry and tongue thick. Her journal lay nearby, pages open to notes she didn't remember writing. Her pen sat beside it, its tip cracked and dried with dark red ink, or something that only looked like ink. She looked around and froze. She wasn't in the basin anymore. She was back in Racetrack Wells, the ghost town. Same sun-battered buildings, same broken church, same crooked windmill that hadn't turned in 100 years. But something had changed. 3 days had passed. She checked her water supply. Barely touched. Her watch had stopped. Her voice cracked when she tried to speak. She had no memory of the journey back. It was as if the desert had carried her, or returned her. She stood unsteadily, her legs trembling. Her first instinct was to run, but she knew better by now. You didn't run from Death Valley. You listened to it, because if it chose to speak, you were already a part of its story. She wandered back toward the church, and that's when she saw him. A man, sitting on the old wooden steps. Tall, thin, with long sun-dark hair and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He looked up as if he'd been expecting her. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked. His voice was calm. like the desert wind, steady weathered. Lena hesitated. What? The monolith, he said, and the mark. That too. He stood and extended a hand. Theo, used to teach astronomy at UC Berkeley. Now I follow the stars that shouldn't exist. Lena didn't shake his hand. She was too tired for pleasantries. How did you find me? Theo smiled faintly. You don't find people in the valley. You intersect with them. They sat inside the crumbling church, the light slanting in like holy dust. Lena told him everything. The singing stones, the vanished caravan, the language she didn't know, and the collapse that stole 3 days of her life. Theo listened without blinking. I've seen the stones move, he finally said, but not randomly, not chaotically. They follow patterns, alignments with stars, not fixed stars, not constellations, but moving bodies, comets, moons, even dead satellites. He opened a worn leather folder filled with maps and photographs, some marked with dates and symbols, others overlaid with star charts. Every line was precise, every movement tracked. Most people thought they drifted due to ice sheets and wind, he continued. But that doesn't explain why the trails resemble the orbital paths of celestial objects, or why some of the rocks move in synchronization, across miles, with exact curvature. Lena stared. You're saying the stones chart the sky? Theo shook his head. No, they remember the sky. They record it, like memory etched into earth. He flipped to a page in his journal, a large map of the racetrack. Red lines traced dozens of stone trails. Each was connected to a celestial coordinate, but one stood out, a black line, bold and isolated. This one, Theo whispered, tapping the line, moves against the sky. Lena frowned. What do you mean? It doesn't follow any celestial pattern. Not gravity, not magnetism, not time. It moves opposite the flow of everything else, as if rejecting the universe itself. Theo stood and paced, agitated. I call it the null rock. It has no trail, just a movement that resets. Every few nights, it returns to its original position, as if trying to stop something, or reverse something. Lena looked down at her wrist. The spiral glowed faintly. I think that's why the desert gave you that, Theo said quietly. You touched something not meant to be touched, and it marked you. You're part of the equation now. Lena shook her head. That's impossible. It's just a symbol. No, he said. It's a timestamp. She stared at him. Theo leaned in, lowering his voice. Time doesn't move forward here. Not entirely. It folds. It coils. These rocks, they're not rocks. They're records. The monoliths? The desert isn't dead. It's a library. He pointed out the window, toward the edge of the town. The null rock sits just past the ridge. I've been watching it for weeks. They set out before nightfall, walking in silence. When they reached the ridge, Lena saw it. A solitary black stone, standing apart from the rest, its surface smoother than any wind could carve. No trail, no grooves, just presence. It radiated something ancient. Theo approached it slowly. Watch. He placed a small white pebble beside the null rock, marked the spot with chalk. Then they waited. For hours, nothing happened. Then, as the moon reached its highest point, the ground trembled, softly. The pebble shifted, rolled slightly away from the null rock. Theo held his breath. Every time, it repels the present. Everything moves except it. Lena crouched, watching. The chalk faded. The pebble returned to its original position. It doesn't want to be watched, she whispered. No, Theo said. It wants to remain fixed, while everything else moves forward. Then Lena saw it. Above them, the stars twitched. Not shimmered, twitched, as if being pulled. The sky pulsed once. The wind stopped, and the spiral on her wrist burned. She screamed, clutching her arm. The spiral glowed white, pulsing with the stars. She fell to the ground, and for a moment she heard them, the stars. Not in sound, but meaning. They were calling. Not her, but the stone. Theo grabbed her, pulling her away. You activated it. The null rock pulsed, not visibly, but in memory. Lena saw flashes, her father's eyes, the caravan scream, the underground map, the lost city buried beneath layers of stone. And one phrase echoed through it all. One of them is moving against us. She gasped. Theo, the null rock, it's not just rogue. It's defiant. He nodded slowly. I think it's fighting the others, trying to prevent something. Prevent what? Theo looked up, eyes full of quiet dread. Repetition. Lena blinked. Theo continued. If the desert is a library, a memory machine, then the stones replay time. Events. Mistakes. Over and over. But this one? It doesn't want to participate. It breaks the loop. She stood, staggering slightly. My father, he was trying to find this. Theo's expression darkened. Then he knew something most didn't, and maybe he became part of the memory to stop it. Lena looked at the null rock. It didn't move. It didn't glow. It just waited. A fixed point in a spinning wheel. A pause in a cursed song. And somewhere deep beneath it all, the monoliths sang, vibrating softly in the pitch of a language too old to name. Lena stared at the stars, then down at her wrist. The spiral still burned, but it no longer hurt. Some say the desert was once a garden, long before it became a graveyard of stone and silence. Before the sun burned the color out of the land and the winds forgot how to speak, it bloomed, fed not by water, but by memory. Then something happened. Something was heard, and the valley learned how to weep. Lena Kessler didn't know that story yet, but she was about to walk into the place where it had been carved in stone. After the null rock's defiance and the star-marked burn pulsing beneath her skin, she and Theo followed its path. Each night, the rogue stone moved slightly, always just ahead of them, just out of reach, like it was leading them rather than fleeing. They tracked its position through Theo's celestial overlay maps. The stone ignored all patterns, crossed all paths, drifting west, then veering sharply south, bypassing every known cluster of sailing stones. It was charting its own legend, and on the fifth day, it disappeared. The chalk trail Theo had laid down, a pale line across the playa to mark its movement, ended near a wall of red and black rock. A canyon mouth, narrow and deep, as if the desert had cracked open to swallow something. The wind died as they stepped in. The temperature dropped sharply. The sunlight, which had scorched their backs only minutes before, dimmed into a strange, dust-colored twilight. The walls of the canyon grew steeper, darker, and then they saw them. Etchings. Not recent, not from tools. Ancient petroglyphs, carved into the stone like open wounds, worn by time but still heartbreakingly clear. Figures bent forward, hands covering their faces. Others knelt, palms pressed into the earth. Some had long tears carved into their cheeks, not drawn as symbols, but etched with repetition, as if someone had scratched the same line again and again until the stone gave in. A line of glyphs ran like a border above them, spiraling inward toward the canyon's end. Lena stepped closer, her fingers grazing the figures. "They're weeping," she whispered. Theo said nothing. He was staring at the largest of the carvings, a massive figure standing alone, arms raised not in worship, but warning. Behind it, dozens of stones floated above the heads of a crowd, not carried, not thrown. Floating. And beneath them, the valley. "The tears created it," Theo murmured. "The valley." A single phrase was etched beneath the floating stones, faded but still legible. "We listened to the stones speak. And so, the desert took our names." Lena stepped back. The canyon walls felt tighter. The silence no longer just watched, it grieved. And within that grief was a warning. They pressed forward. At the canyon's final bend, they saw it. The rebel stone. It stood alone at the base of a bowl-shaped cliff, a wide amphitheater of cracked sandstone. The stone was unlike any Lena had seen before, tall, dark gray, with thin jagged edges like broken glass. Its surface shimmered with a dull sheen, as if sweat clung to it. It wasn't just resting. It was waiting. They approached cautiously. As they drew closer, Lena's skin prickled with static. The closer she got, the more intense the feeling became. Her pulse slowed. Her thoughts scattered. Her father's voice returned in flashes. "She's too young, Henry. Don't take her there. They're not stones, they're remnants. If we dig any deeper, we're not just uncovering history. We're trespassing in it." She blinked the memories away. Theo knelt and examined the base. There were marks in the soil, not stone trails, but drag marks. And something else. Black smudges. Fluid? He touched one, then pulled back. "It's wet." Lena's breath caught. The stone pulsed. A single drop of thick, black liquid welled from a crack in its surface, slow, viscous, like oil. It shimmered with color under the fading light. Then another drop. And another. The stone was crying. Theo stood frozen. "It's bleeding." Lena stepped forward. She didn't know why. Instinct, perhaps. Or gravity. She reached out and pressed her palm against the surface. The stone shivered beneath her touch. And then it screamed. Not out loud. Not into the air. Into her. A soundless wail that bypassed the ears and struck directly into the marrow. A history poured through her like a broken dam, an entire lifetime of grief and silence compressed into a single moment. She saw a tribe older than any record huddled beneath stars, listening, hearing the first hums in the sand, a warning whispered by the stones. Not a threat, not a curse, a request. The earth wanted to be remembered, and so the tribe began to record it. But the stones spoke too much, showed too much. They began to scream, and the people began to weep, not from sadness, but from knowing. They saw the end of their own kind etched in spirals, saw the land fracture and drown in its own memory, and they begged the stones to forget. But memory doesn't forget. It only waits. The tribe's tears fell into the earth, and from them, Death Valley was born. Lena collapsed to her knees, gasping. Her arm burned, not from the spiral tattoo, but from beneath it. The black liquid had crawled into her skin. Theo grabbed her. "Lena!" She looked at him, wide-eyed, sweat slicking her forehead. "I saw them," she whispered. "They made the valley by mistake. They loved the stones. They just wanted to understand." Theo helped her stand. "You're burning up." "It's not fever," she said. "It's memory." She looked back at the stone. More black tears flowed from it now, streaming gently down its sides, vanishing into the sand. The ground beneath it shimmered faintly. And there, near the base, half covered by dust, was something glinting. Lena knelt and uncovered it. A nameplate. Worn, metal, and unmistakably modern. Kessler, Unit D2, Core Survey. She went pale. Theo crouched beside her. "You knew this name." "It was my father's," she whispered. "It was a dig site." She ran her hands along the base, uncovering more twisted metal, the outline of a tent peg, and then, with a sickening lurch, a human femur. But untouched by time. She stared, frozen. "My father didn't disappear chasing the stones," she said. "He came here to bury what he did." Theo looked at her, unsure. She spoke slowly. It wasn't a natural landslide. It was an error. His dig crew, 6 of them. They went too deep. Triggered something. The valley responded. Her hands shook. He covered it up. Told the world they vanished during a sandstorm. Theo said nothing. The wind picked up, carrying that strange sweetness again. Lena stood slowly. "I think he came back here afterward. Alone. Not for answers. For forgiveness." They stood in silence as the stone continued to bleed. Then Lena turned her wrist over. The spiral glowed again, only now it pulsed to the rhythm of the drops. 1, 2, 3. Her skin absorbed the last of the black liquid, and the wind stopped. The stars overhead shimmered. Lena looked up. "I think I understand what he was trying to do. He didn't want to solve a mystery. He wanted to carry it, to take its weight." The stone shuddered. Theo backed away. The tears had stopped. The stone was still. But Lena wasn't the same. Something ancient now flowed beneath her skin. Something that didn't have words, only echoes. Some nights in the desert feel colder than they should. Not because of the wind or the dark, but because of what you can hear when everything else stops. That night, the desert had no wind, and Lena Kessler could hear the whispers. They weren't loud. They didn't call her name, but they spoke just the same, not in words, but in riddles stitched from memories that weren't hers. Her father's voice murmuring beneath the crackle of sand. A child's laughter buried in silence. Sounds like echoes from forgotten dreams, unmoored, drifting through the dust. She hadn't slept in days. Since the stone cried, something inside her had changed. Her wrists still pulsed with a faint light under the skin, the spiral glowing softly when the air was stillest. Theo had watched her closely since then, saying little, scribbling in his journal, tracking not the stars this time, but her. They camped at the edge of the canyon, not daring to sleep beside the weeping stone again. At dusk, Lena stood atop a dune and stared at the horizon. Nothing moved. No animals. No insects. Even the air felt paused. The world had grown still, as though something ancient was listening. "The whispers are clearer now," she told Theo quietly. He looked up from his notes. "What do they say?" She hesitated. "They're not words. They're instructions. But I don't know how to follow them yet." Theo frowned. What if the desert doesn't want you to follow? What if it wants you to remember? That night, the spiral glowed brighter. And for the first time, Lena heard a single word, not a voice, but a pressure pressed gently into her thoughts. "Below." In the morning, they returned to the basin. The black stone had stopped crying. Its surface was dry, but the ground beneath it felt wrong. Not soft, not solid, but hollow. They began to dig. The sand resisted at first, clinging tightly as if afraid to let go. But after an hour of careful excavation, Lena's shovel struck stone. Not rock, crafted stone. Smooth, carved, and shaped. Theo joined her. They uncovered a flat surface, rectangular, seamless, embedded deep in the earth. Theo ran his fingers along its edge. "This isn't a burial marker," he said. "It's a door." Together, they cleared more of the sand until the outline became clear, a stone hatch flush with the ground. In its center, etched faintly, was a symbol Lena recognized immediately, a spiral of 7 stars. Her mark. She reached out, hand trembling, and pressed her palm against it. The ground pulsed, then shifted. The stone door cracked, just slightly, and a low, deep breath of air escaped from below. It smelled like dust, rusted iron, and something unfamiliar, something older than air itself. They pried the hatch open, revealing a narrow stairwell spiraling down into blackness. Lena looked at Theo. "You don't have to come." He didn't answer. He just clicked on his flashlight and stepped into the dark. They descended slowly. The walls were tight, made of the same smooth stone. Strange patterns ran along the surfaces, not carvings, but textures embedded into the material like veins in skin. The further they went, the quieter the world became. Even the sound of their footsteps vanished. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a chamber, and silence greeted them like a scream. The room was circular, low-ceilinged, carved directly into the stone, not natural, not constructed by any modern hand. Along the outer wall, arranged in a perfect ring, were 6 figures. Skeletons, all seated, all facing the wall. Lena's breath caught. Each skeleton's hands were pressed against the stone, fingers curled into claws, some shattered, others blood-stained. "They tried to dig their way out," Theo whispered. "No," Lena said. "They tried to stop what was already inside." The walls bore faint red smears, ancient and dried, but unmistakably human. A single spiral was carved above each figure, not identical, but personalized. Some tighter, others broken or warped. Theo approached one skeleton, the closest. Something glinted in its lap. He knelt and gently brushed the dust aside. It wasn't a notebook, not a compass, not a relic. It was a device. Circular, cold, made of a material he didn't recognize, neither metal nor stone. Its surface pulsed faintly with a pale blue light, and symbols glowed across it. Not letters, not numbers, but runes that shifted when looked at too long. "What is that?" Lena asked. Theo shook his head. It's not human. He turned it over. There were grooves along the back, not buttons, more like touchpads. He hesitated, then placed his fingers along one. The device lit up, and the chamber changed. The spiral carvings began to glow faintly, the room bathed in soft red light. From somewhere deep within the stone, a low frequency pulsed, not sound, but intention. Lena stepped back, eyes wide. Then, in a flash of clarity, she understood. This chamber isn't a tomb, she whispered. It's a message. Theo looked at her. These people, they weren't buried. They came here willingly. They sealed themselves inside. Why? She stared at the device in Theo's hand. To contain whatever that is. Or to listen to it. Or maybe both. The spiral on her wrist throbbed. Suddenly, the symbols on the device rearranged, like they recognized her. And Lena saw something she'd never forget. The stone walls dissolved, not physically, but in perception. For a moment, the chamber showed its true form. Beyond the stone, Lena saw stars, millions of them. A cosmos rotating slowly but wrong. Spirals intersected in unnatural geometry. Moons orbited nothing. And at the center, a black sun pulsed, not with heat, but with memory. Each skeleton in the room had seen it too. That was what they died with. She dropped to her knees, overwhelmed. They saw time end. Theo didn't respond. She looked up. He was gone. The chamber was empty. The skeletons were still there. The device lay where he'd stood. But Theo himself had vanished. No noise. No flash. No breath. Just absence. Lena ran to the stairwell. It was gone. The door had sealed. Stone wall. Seamless. She beat against it. Theo! No reply. The air grew colder. Then the whispers returned. Clear now. So many voices. Ancient. They spoke all at once, like wind curling through 1,000 tunnels. He chose to see. You chose to carry. Not all can remember. You are not lost. You are becoming. Lena backed away, heart thudding. The spiral on her wrist began to bleed. Not blood. Black liquid. The same liquid the stone had wept. It seeped from her skin slowly, tracing the pattern it had once marked. She cried out, dropping to her knees. The dust rose gently around her, swirling in patterns that echoed the cosmos she had seen. Then everything went still. The whispers faded, and in the silence, a new voice, faint, broken, trembling, reached her ears. Lena. It was Theo. Faint. Far away. Trapped. Inside the stone. There are moments in life when the world pauses, not because of choice or chance, but because something ancient decides it must. Lena Kessler didn't remember falling asleep. She remembered screaming, the spiral bleeding black from her wrist. Theo's voice, distant, like an echo inside a sealed jar. Then, nothing. Now, the stone beneath her feet pulsed with warmth. The room breathed. Not metaphorically. The chamber literally rose and fell like a living lung, its walls flexing in sync with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The dust vibrated with each breath, and then a sharp crack split the air, running like lightning across the ceiling. Stone groaned. Air escaped through invisible seams. Then, collapse. Not violent, not sudden, but a sinking, like a breath exhaled for the last time. The chamber floor tilted. The spirals on the wall dissolved into dust. Lena scrambled toward the staircase that had once sealed shut. It was open now, barely, and leaking a blinding white light. She ran. Her legs barely worked, her lungs dragged for air that no longer felt like oxygen. Her fingertips bled as she clawed her way through the narrow opening. The earth pushed her up and out. And then, silence. The desert greeted her like a painting frozen in time. Lena collapsed onto the sand, coughing, heaving, clawing at her chest. The light was strange, half day, half dream. When her eyes adjusted, she knew something was wrong. The sun was stuck, frozen at the horizon, split between day and dusk. Time had stopped moving. She stood shakily and looked around. The canyon wall still curved inward, but now the stone shadows no longer shifted. The wind, which had haunted every crack of the valley since her arrival, was gone. Not still, absent. The kind of silence that makes your bones itch. She turned. 20 feet away stood Theo. 1 foot off the ground. Arm half lifted. Mouth slightly open, as if calling her name. He didn't move. Lena walked toward him, heart thudding. He was warm, alive, but completely frozen. His eyes were wide and filled with something halfway between confusion and awe. And his breath? Not moving. He was a statue of flesh and bone. She turned her eyes to the sky. A bird hung motionless in the air, wings spread, caught mid-flap. A second floated yards away. Not falling, not flying. Suspended like marionettes with their strings cut. Lena staggered backward. Even the dust didn't rise from her footsteps. The world had locked itself in a single moment. Not broken, paused. The spiral on her wrist burned again. But this time, it didn't hurt. It throbbed in rhythm with something else. Something nearby. She felt it before she saw it. A hum, but almost musical. The kind of sound you don't hear with your ears, but with your bones. She followed it, climbing the canyon ridge where the monolith once stood. But it was gone. No stone. No pit. Just a perfect circle etched into the ground, seared black, cracked at the edges, like something immense had been ripped from the earth and pulled upward. At its center, the sand sank in on itself. A pit. Circular. Almost perfectly symmetrical. The edges shimmered faintly, warping the air like heat rising off metal. But the air was cold. Stones circled the pit. Not resting on the ground, orbiting. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Spinning silently around the void like planets around a star. Each followed its own slow, impossible arc. Some floated inches above the surface. Others drifted higher. All moved without sound. Without touch. Without force. Lena stepped closer. Her breath fogged in the air, something that shouldn't happen in the desert. She held out her hand. One of the stones brushed past her fingertips. It was cold, wet, and vibrating with the sound she'd been following. Not random. A song. A song built from time itself. Each stone carried a note. A tone. A memory. Lena crouched at the edge of the pit and peered in. She expected darkness. Perhaps more stone. But what she saw was herself. Falling. Endlessly. Down a spiraling tunnel that didn't exist in this world. Her clothes were the same. Her hair moved with motion. Her arms reached upward, but not for escape. For something unseen. She tried to cry out, but no sound came. The pit gave no echo. No response. She blinked. Her other self blinked back. And then her reflection smiled. Not kindly. The image vanished, replaced by stars. A churning whirlpool of celestial bodies, all spinning too quickly, reversing direction in jagged jerks like an old film reel tearing and rewinding itself. The pit was not a hole. It was time broken open, a scar in the skin of memory. And she'd been marked to see it. She reached toward the edge, her fingertips curling over the lip. Then a voice behind her. So familiar. Don't. She turned. Theo. Standing. Breathing. Eyes wide. What happened to you? She asked. He shook his head, slowly. I don't know. One moment I was moving toward you, then everything froze. I could see myself, outside myself, like my body kept going and I didn't. Lena pointed to the pit. It showed me myself, falling. Theo stepped beside her. He looked in and his face drained of color. What is that? She didn't answer, because she didn't know. The spiral on her wrist glowed again. The stones in the air slowed, began to descend. Time was shifting again. The world was resuming. Birds overhead twitched. Dust rose from her boots. Theo's chest now moved with breath. But the pit remained, still waiting. Theo grabbed her wrist. Whatever it is, it's not a memory. She looked at him. It's a door. He nodded slowly. But not one we open. One we were already pushed through. The earth groaned softly. Somewhere beyond the canyon, thunder rolled, not from the sky, but from beneath the ground. Lena stood, shaking. "We need to leave." Theo didn't move. His eyes locked on the swirling stones. "It's calling someone. Not you. Not me. But something else." And then Lena heard it. The whispers again. Only now, not from her mind. From the pit. Voices she had never known. Voices she was never meant to hear. They said only one thing. Again and again. "We remember what you buried." There are moments in life when the body no longer belongs to the earth, when thought slips out of the skin and soul drifts sideways, not upward, not downward, but into something else. Something deeper than memory, older than fear. Lena Kessler had only ever imagined what death might feel like. But this was not death. She hadn't fallen into the pit, not physically. She had only looked. But in looking, she'd crossed a threshold. One that didn't show itself with light or darkness, but with knowing. Her body still sat at the pit's edge, but her mind was gone, swept across a boundary not meant to be passed. She stood now in a place without distance. There was no sky, no ground. Just an endless, weightless space where shapes moved like shadows behind frosted glass. Sound didn't travel here. It curled. It shimmered. And then something began to form. It wasn't a figure. Not at first. It was a ripple in the air, a shimmer of light folding inward, collecting dust from nowhere and heat from something unseen. Slowly it took shape. The being, tall, slender, not quite human. Its skin was made of shifting sand, constantly falling but never disappearing. Its eyes were two burning pinpricks of white, and where its mouth should have been was only a soft glow. When it moved, the space around it bent. It did not speak. It was speaking. Without sound. Without language. Lena felt its voice in her teeth. "You have walked too far, Lena of the spiral. And now the map must be read aloud." Her thoughts trembled. "What are you?" The being bowed slightly as though remembering how. "Cut him. I was the first cartographer." Lena stepped back. The valley? Of memory. Of pain. It extended a hand, if it could be called that, and from its palm spun images, not like film or memory, but living experiences projected into the air like smoke. She saw Earth, not as it was now, but ancient, untouched. Then a fracture, a sound, not a scream, but something heavier, a guilt dropped into the soil. The planet began as all do, in silence. Then it learned how to remember. Kadem gestured again. She saw mountains rising, but not from tectonic shifts, from sorrow, from wars, from grief that saturated the land until the land responded in kind. Every wound upon the earth leaves a mark, but some linger longer than flesh. Stone is memory in solid form. The images now showed deserts, vast and trembling, filled with moving stones, not rolling, not wind-driven, crawling, as if pulled by unseen threads. The world is laced with these memories. Kadem continued, but most have faded, forgotten by those who fed them. Only one place remains intact. Death Valley appeared, massive, breathing. She saw the spiral trails of the sailing stones forming intricate patterns, not random, but purposeful, curling into formations that resembled star charts, veins, brain matter, even alphabets not yet born. "This is the last living map," Kadem said, "and you carry its key." Lena looked down. The spiral on her wrist glowed again. Kadem's eyes flickered brighter. "Your father gave you the mark. He did not mean to." Lena stiffened. "You knew him." "I still do, because he remembers." And then Lena saw it. Kadem raised both hands, and a sphere unfolded between them, a globe of liquid memory. Inside it, Henry Kessler. Not as she remembered him, not older, broken, but younger. Smiling, his eyes full of ambition, curiosity. She saw him leading a dig team into the basin, saw the stones around them begin to shift, but no one listened. Then she saw the accident. The fault line was thin, fragile. His tools had struck something buried, not stone, not earth. It screamed when broken. The cave collapsed. 5 men and women buried alive. He screamed for them, He clawed for days. When they were gone, he vanished. And then, the last moment, her father alone, crawling to the black monolith, pressing his hand to it, the spiral burned into his palm. He fell backward and became still. Stone overtook him, slow at first, then entirely. His skin calcified, his eyes glassed, his voice muted into dust. Lena stumbled backward, choking. No, he didn't die. He didn't. Kadem's tone did not change. He remembered too much. He paid the price of truth. Lena fell to her knees. I should have come sooner. You could not. The spiral only opens when the map is ready to be read. She looked up, eyes brimming. What do you want from me? Not want. Require. Kadem stepped closer, the light from its form now illuminating every hidden thing inside her. Memories she buried, words she'd never said, regrets she'd pretended not to feel. You must finish what he began. The stones do not move by wind. They move by weight, by thoughts, by guilt, by memory. They are gravity for the soul. Lena's breath trembled. Then why do they move at all? Come turn toward the void, that timeless whirlpool of spirals and song. Because pain seeks direction. Memory must drift, or else it rots. Images poured across the air again. She saw a village buried in volcanic ash, its people's grief embedded in the obsidian. A battlefield turned to a canyon, each drop of blood altering the slope. A lonely man in 1890 walking across the racetrack, crying for a child he lost. A stone followed him, step by step. Lena gasped. They follow emotion. They do not follow. They carry it away. She stood slowly, breath ragged. Then why are they leading me here? Come finally turned to face her fully. Because you are full. You cannot carry more. Lena's voice broke. So what happens now? Kadem's body began to dissolve, sand trailing upward into unseen winds. Its voice faded, but not entirely. You are not the map. You are the hand that draws it. And you must draw the last memory. Lena staggered backward as the vision faded. Her eyes snapped open. She was back at the pit, breathing, alive. The world had resumed. The sun moved. The wind returned. Theo knelt beside her, shaking her shoulders. Lena, you stopped breathing. She stared up at him, dazed. I saw him. Theo froze. My father. He didn't die. Tis part of it now. She stood. The spiral on her wrist was now etched deeper, no longer glowing, but inked like a scar. The stones in the valley trembled. The desert inhaled and waited. Some doors do not swing open. They peel back the world like skin, quietly, slowly, and only when the wound beneath is ready to be seen. Lena Kessler stood at the edge of the pit, her mind trembling from what Kadem had shown her. Her father had not died. He had become something the world could no longer recognize. A keeper of sorrow, a vessel of memory, a stone, inscribed not with words, but with the weight of what he could not forgive himself for. And now, the map, the valley itself, wanted her to decide. The spiral on her wrist no longer glowed. It had settled into a deep, charcoal black, etched into her skin like it had always belonged there. Theo sat nearby, silent. His hands trembled when he tried to light the stove. He wouldn't look her in the eye. They had both heard the whispers. They had both seen time fracture. But only she had been given the final choice. As night blanketed the canyon and the stones began their silent orbit again, Lena felt it. A tug, not on her body, but deeper, beneath thought, beneath self. The pit called her again. But this time, it didn't ask her to look. It asked her to enter. She didn't wake Theo. She simply stepped forward, one barefoot stride at a time, letting the warmth of the ground guide her. The pit no longer shimmered. It had gone still, a mirror without glass. And as she crossed the lip and fell forward, the world around her vanished. What greeted her was not pain. It was peace. She stood in a place unlike any she had ever seen. The sky was black glass. The ground beneath her feet was obsidian sand, smooth, cool and endless. Jagged dunes rose in the distance, frozen in unnatural angles, casting no shadow. Above her, constellations she didn't recognize pulsed slowly, as if breathing with her heartbeat. This was not death. This was memory, unfiltered, made into landscape. In the distance, she saw a shape. A monolith, shorter than the others, curved at the top like a broken tombstone. She walked. With each step, the sand grew warmer. The stars above flickered faster. The silence deepened. And then she reached it. A single stone, standing alone in the middle of the glass sand sea. Her breath caught, because carved into its center, pulsing faintly with a red light, was a heartbeat. Not a symbol, not an illusion. A real, measured human heartbeat, thumping from inside the stone. And she knew. It was him. Her father. She dropped to her knees, tears already streaming. The stone pulsed again, and then it spoke. Not aloud, but through memory. His voice filled the air around her, not young, not old, but full of regret. Lena. Her name like a prayer. I hoped you'd never come here. She closed her eyes. Dad. He continued. This place, it's not meant to hold us. But when I broke the seal, when I disturbed what slept, I gave it something it never had before. A story. Lena's hand touched the stone. It was warm. I saw what you saw, she whispered. The dig, the collapse, the monolith. I thought I was trying to solve something, he said, but I was just burying the truth. And the valley, it remembers everything. The pulse grew faster. I begged it to let me forget. I begged it to take me instead. Lena sobbed. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were still pure, still unmarked. I thought, if I gave it everything, it would stop calling you. She bowed her head. But it didn't, she whispered. No, his voice said gently. It needed someone to finish the map. Someone strong enough to draw the last trail. A wind began to rise, slow, hissing, like breath through teeth. The dunes shifted around her. Far off in the distance, silhouettes began to form, human shapes made of stone, all facing her. Watching, Lena turned back to the heartbeat. You can come back. I can take your place. The pulse slowed. You don't understand, her father said. Only one soul can leave. The debt must stay paid. She looked down at the mark on her wrist. The spiral was glowing again, brighter than ever. I've been carrying your pain since you left, she said. Let me carry it all. No, his voice said. Sharper now. Urgent. That's how it feeds. That's what the valley wants. Your sorrow, your guilt. That's what moves the stones. The wind screamed now. The sand lifted. The sky turned red. And still the stone pulsed. The other figures began to move, stone arms stretching, heads tilting. They did not threaten. They waited. She turned back to the stone. I'm tired, she said. I want to understand. No, her father said. You want to be forgiven. But this place doesn't give forgiveness. Only memory. The earth trembled. The heartbeat pulsed louder. And then, silence. Lena, he said softly, you are still alive. You don't have to finish what I started. I made the map. You must leave it behind. She sobbed. But if I go, you stay. I already have, he said. And then the wind stopped. The valley exhaled. Lena stood, trembling, hands still pressed to the stone. The spiral burned like fire. And then, she whispered, I'm sorry, and touched the heartbeat. The world shattered. The sky cracked like glass. The obsidian dunes burst upward, and Lena fell. Some awakenings do not feel like waking. Lena Kessler opened her eyes to a sky too blue, too bright, too familiar. She lay flat on cracked earth, wind brushing against her face in the gentlest whisper, like something ancient was trying not to disturb her. She blinked. No spiraling monolith. No pit. No orbiting stones. No obsidian dunes. Just sand. The ordinary kind. And silence. But not the weighted silence of the place she'd been. The breathing stillness of the pit or the timeless hush of Kadem's plain. This was dry silence. Earthly silence. Empty silence. She pushed herself upright, her limbs sore, her mouth dry. The wind pressed against her skin, and for a moment, she felt the world rotating again. The sun hovered just past morning, rising steadily. Time had resumed. The spiral mark was gone from her wrist. Not faded, not blurred, gone. Only pale skin remained, untouched. Her heart pounded. She looked around. The familiar landmarks of the valley, brittle rocks, distant hills, the curled lip of the racetrack basin had returned. But there were no signs of Theo. No camp. No journals. No crates. Not even footprints in the sand. As if the journey had been a dream or belonged to a different version of her altogether. She stood slowly, legs shaky, breath shallow. She called out. No answer. Only wind and sun. She wandered aimlessly for hours, stumbling across nothing. No compass. No evidence she had ever touched the ancient world. The desert felt barren again, and it filled her chest with a sorrow so large it felt like it would split her open. She began to doubt. Not just the experience, but her memory of it. What if the monolith, the rebel stone, even her father's heartbeat inside the obsidian, what if it had all been madness, crafted by isolation and grief? But then she saw her shadow, and something was wrong. It didn't move when she did. It followed, but late, the second too slow. She raised her hand. It rose after. She tilted her head. It mimicked, barely catching up. Not a perfect echo, more like a recording. Like someone watching her from behind a screen of time. Her breath caught. She turned in circles, her shadow dancing just out of sync, as if still remembering her. A memory not quite aligned. And then she wept. Alone, kneeling in the sand, whispering the names of everyone the valley had taken. Her father, Theo, the crew, herself. Even as the wind erased her footprints, the valley did not answer. But it listened. That night, 2 park rangers found her wandering barefoot along the gravel access road, eyes sunburnt, voice dry, whispering to herself in a language neither of them recognized. She didn't fight when they picked her up, didn't speak much. When they asked who she was, she simply said, Lena. They brought her to a ranger outpost near Furnace Creek, gave her water, shade, and a cot. She slept for 16 hours. When she woke, a doctor asked her how long she'd been in the desert. She said 12 days. The sunburn said 3. There was no record of a Theo Marsh in the system. No entry logs, no permits. Nothing. They searched the basin. No stone trail. No pit. No monolith. No trace. But she knew. She tried to explain what she'd seen. The moving stones. The voices in the dust. The frozen sun. The spirals. Her father's memory locked in living rock. They nodded politely, wrote it down, marked the file, mental trauma from dehydration and isolation. But the desert didn't forget. A month passed, then 2. Lena didn't return home. She stayed in the nearby town of Shoshone, renting a 1-room cabin and taking shifts at the museum. Tourists came and went, asking about ghost towns, snake sightings, and old mining legends. Sometimes, they asked about the sailing stones. That's when she would speak. She told them the truth. Not the scientific theory. Not the wind and ice explanation. She told them that the stones remembered. That they moved with pain. With weight. With what we leave behind. Most laughed. Some nodded. A few looked frightened and walked away. No one believed. Except one. A boy. 8 years old. Quiet. Wore oversized glasses and carried a sketchpad everywhere. His mother said he talked to rocks, heard music in the hills, and once dug a hole in the yard and cried when it said goodbye. He listened to Lena's story in silence. And when she finished, he said, I hear them too. Lena stared. He pulled up his sleeve. On his wrist, in faint charcoal lines, like he'd been drawing with a dusty finger, was a spiral of 7 stars. She didn't tell anyone. Didn't say a word. She simply asked him to come back if the stones ever started singing again. And he did. Once a week. Just to talk. Sometimes, he brought drawings of deserts with 2 moons, of birds frozen in flight, of stones hovering over towns. One day, he handed her a fresh sketch. A stone, thick, dark, and sharp-edged, with a glowing crack at the center. She froze. It was the rebel stone. Beneath it, he had drawn its trail, curling away from the racetrack. Not inward, outward, toward civilization. She asked him, "When did you see this?" He looked at her with innocent eyes. "This morning." It moved again. Lena didn't sleep that night. She sat beneath the stars, watching the dunes shift gently in the wind, wondering how far the stone had traveled, wondering what pain it carried now, and who it was headed for. The spiral never returned to her wrist, but her shadow still lagged behind. Time forgets most things, but the sand doesn't. It took years, decades even, for the story of Lena Kessler to fade from whispered folklore and desert conspiracy into the silence that the valley demands. Tourists came and went. New trails were made. Old ones were swallowed. Her cabin was torn down. Her face forgotten. But some stories, like the stones themselves, keep moving even after we stop watching. The boy who once whispered with her, now a man, told tales to his own child. A daughter named Mira. She grew up with bedtime stories of singing sands and living rocks. Not fairy tales, but accounts. Tales. Places. And then one summer, when Mira had just turned 23, the desert called again. The rebel stone, yes, that stone, was found on the outskirts of Bishop, California. Not far from the mountains. Not far from where Lena had once drawn maps in the dust. But far too distant from Death Valley for science to understand how it had arrived. It hadn't been transported. It hadn't rolled. There were no tracks behind it. No signs of interference. It had simply appeared, resting at the edge of a playground, as if it had always been there. And it was massive now, taller than a man, shaped like a jagged tooth, half buried in gravel, humming so softly that only children could hear it. Local kids said it vibrated when you cried near it. When Mira saw the news clipping, her chest ached with recognition. There were no photos of Lena, no internet trail. Her mother's name had been scrubbed by time and disinterest. But the spiral stone, that shape, it sang through her bones. And so she returned, back to the desert, back to the land where stories walked in silence. When she arrived at Bishop, there were fences, lights, scientists in white tents and yellow vests. People had questions, but no one had answers. The ground around the stone resisted digging, not reluctant, refused to be excavated. Shovels bounced off it like rubber against steel. Machinery stalled. Wires shorted. The closer they came to the stone's base, the more their instruments refused to work. One man had a seizure while holding ground-penetrating radar equipment. When he woke, he said he'd seen a city of glass buried beneath the town. Another, an archaeologist, claimed he'd uncovered a fossil of a being with 6 eyes and a crown of carved bone. But when others went to see, the sand had reclaimed the whole. And then came the visions. At first, it was subtle. A woman in her kitchen watched her shadow split into two. One walked away. The other stood still. A gas station attendant reported a mountain on the horizon that no one else could see, shimmering like it was aflame. Children woke from naps screaming names no one had heard before, Ashural, Nalkaith, in the mapmaker. And then it escalated. People saw cities, just flashes, overlaid on their homes. Marble pillars where wooden beams stood. Oceans where roads ran. Skies with twin suns. People swore they had glimpsed wars with weapons made of stone and memory. Kingdoms where the wind carried commands. Continents that slid like skin over muscle. Bishop became a place where the air hummed, where the earth waited, and in the center of it all was that stone. The rebel, now silent, now still. It had reached its destination, but the world had not caught up to it yet. Mira stayed. She set up camp outside the perimeter. The scientists called her a distraction, a poet, a child of myth. But they couldn't explain how her analog tape recorder picked up voices none of their digital machines could hear. Static, and then a whisper, "Do not map the end." Over and over again, "Do not map the end." It came through power lines, through emergency broadcasts, through walkie-talkies and baby monitors, always in the same voice. Lena's. Not frantic, not pained, but pleading. One night, the town's lights flickered in unison. The wind stopped, and from beneath the sand, deep beneath, the earth sighed. It wasn't a quake. It wasn't seismic. It was something older, a shudder, as if the planet itself had remembered something painful. The scientists gathered. They brought more tools, more theories. But Mira, she stepped back. She watched the stars. One constellation blinked out, then another. A frequency so low it passed through bodies, not ears. The beat, the pulse, the ground bulged, just slightly. Then again, it grew. Sand spilled. Children screamed. And then it broke free. A massive stone, unlike the others. Not a shard, not an obelisk. A shape, a heart, formed from stone, but warm to the touch. Carved with lines no hand had drawn. Beating, once every few seconds. A deep, slow rhythm, as if the planet itself had finally made its wound visible. People fell to their knees. Some cried, some ran. The scientists tried to measure it, but no tools worked. The frequency disrupted devices, froze computers, batteries melted, screens burst into static and stayed that way. Only Mira stood still. She stepped forward, palm trembling, touched it, and it answered. A voice, not hers, not Lena's, but something collective. It spoke without sound. In her mind, a whisper of every voice lost to the sand, every story buried, every step taken by those who disappeared, every tear shed into dirt, every war waged and forgotten. The heart was memory, undeniable. And in that moment, Mira saw. She saw her mother's last breath. Lena, kneeling in a spiral of stones, whispering, "Let it stop with me." She saw Theo's eyes close as the tomb sealed behind him. She saw the ancient tribe that had listened to the rocks, whose tears carved Death Valley. She saw the cartographer, Cutton, erasing stars one by one to protect what Earth had buried. She saw cities, entire civilizations that had once danced on crusts of floating stone, now reduced to dust, waiting for someone to remember. And she understood. The stones had never moved aimlessly. They had always carried pain, like veins. And this was the heart. Mira dropped to her knees. The beat echoed in her chest. A second heart. A rhythm she could never unhear. Then silence. The heart stopped. Everything went still. No wind. No voices. Just the sound of Myra's breath in her ears. And then the stone crumbled. Not shattered. Not broken. But dissolved. Into ash. Into memory. Carried by the breeze. Gone. The rebel stone did not move again. Nor did any of the others. They had reached the edge. And stopped. People would come. They'd search for meaning. For proof. For science. But they would not find Mira. She disappeared the next day. Her tent still there. Her recorder still humming. But no footprints leading away. Only a faint spiral drawn in the dirt. 7 stars. And the word, remember. When the last grain of sand settles, and the wind forgets your name, will the earth still remember your story? The stones have stopped, yes, but their silence is not the end. It is the beginning. Somewhere out there, beyond the maps, beyond time, echoes of forgotten civilizations still breathe beneath our feet. Their memories aren't carved in books or etched in history. They live in the cracks of mountains, the folds of desert winds, and the shadows that hesitate just a moment too long. Maybe you felt it before, a shiver on a still day, a voice that wasn't quite a voice, a place that feels impossibly old. These aren't accidents. They're invitations. If this journey through memory and myth stirred something inside you, if the whispering stones spoke to your soul in ways even words cannot explain, then stay with us. There are more stories waiting in the dust, more ancient truths half buried in time, more voices calling from beyond the veil of what we call reality. So listen closely and follow. Like this tale, if it moved you, share it with those who still believe the earth has secrets left to tell. Leave your thoughts below. your interpretations, your theories, your dreams. And most of all, subscribe. Because here, the past isn't over. It's just waiting to be remembered.